yeah, this Bible is really still pertinent. It still has value. It still is has what do you call it? Relevancy for our modern time. Though it was written a couple thousand years ago, some of it was written about 3,500 to 4,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago, depending on when Moses was at Mount Sinai, or when they first started writing it down, because the first 5 books are written supposedly by whoever Moses appointed to record their activities. But I guess there's a debate on actual the timeline about the when it was written down for us. A lot of it was through oral tradition that was documented later by scribes, by historians. But they would record their history. The ancients were very good about recording their history, actually. And the things that they couldn't really explain in a literal sense, they had to improvise with colorful language, metaphors, and with hyperbole. Because they didn't know what it was they were witnessing. They weren't acquainted with it. So when they saw the Shekinah glory settle on Mount Sinai, they didn't know what it was. I mean, they just assumed it was God. God showed up on top of the mountain in a flat, and it wasn't just lightning or atmospheric. Suppose it wasn't just atmospheric phenomenon. They would have been familiar with it. It must have been pretty significant for them to call it God's presence, God's power. When God landed on Mount Sinai and called Moses up there to give him the 10 Commandments. Because they still knew how to differentiate between natural phenomenon and divine activity. Phenomenon that wasn't natural. And they weren't, look at how knowledgeable they were. They built the pyramids, they built all those statues that are almost perfectly symmetrical. So they definitely knew. They weren't backward thinkers. They were very smart people. They didn't just come up with stuff off the blue, and try to say it was fact. They were very meticulous about properly representing what they were experiencing. So they wrote it down for us in this book. They wrote down all the details of their activities, what they felt God was calling them to do. They would record that. But they would always look for evidence of confirmation from God that it was in fact God's direction. So they would put fleece on the ground and see what would happen if it was just ordinary, if it was just some kind of lucky chance or lucky or natural phenomenon. The fleece would turn wet if the ground around it was wet. The fleece would be dry if the ground around it would be dry. So that was pretty obvious to them that was not some divine supernatural event. But if the fleece turned wet and the ground around it was dry, and vice versa, if the ground was wet and the fleece was dry, the very next day, you knew that some kind of phenomenon was going on that wasn't just your natural order. There's many similar things like that what had occurred to the ancient Israelites, and they are the descendants of Abraham. They would record those events, and they would record natural events. They recorded the flood, though it was apparently natural, but it was supernaturally guided, it was supernaturally ordered, and started supernaturally, but it was, by all appearances, it was a natural event, a global flood. But the source of it, that's what makes it supernatural and natural, because it was something tipped the balance of the scales, and with the gravitational pull of the earth, or the earth was hit by a huge asteroid or something, and it caused a major shift of the tectonic plates and the pull, that pull that runs through the earth, north and south pull. The whole earth tilted on its axis. So probably when it was hit, they say that it flew everything around it. So like an earthquake, if an earthquake moves that way, it's going to push all the water, and you're going to have a tsunami. Well, the same thing happened. The earth was whacked, and supposedly they think that the earth was hit right there in, where is it, Canada? There's a big hole, a big crater somewhere up there. I don't know if that was the one that did it, but they look for these big craters. They got them in Arabia. They got them in the desert. They got these huge craters all over the earth. And some of them are in the desert, and they try to calculate the impact, the force of the impact of these asteroids that landed there, or meteors, and see what it would do to the earth if it was significant enough to move it out of place. But they say that the earth wasn't always tilted at its current angle. They say it was a different angle, and that's why they find fossils that shouldn't be where they are. They find tropical fossils where it's cold and freezing, or even in the desert they find these tropical plants and tropical animals that shouldn't even be there. So they say the climate everything shifted. The tropical wasn't always in the areas where it's tropical. That the whole Earth moved around, it changed. The rotation of maybe even the rotation of the Earth, the angle of the poles, it all affected and continental drift. They talk about continental drift, that the continents moved around. And of course they have to factor in the global flood, because the flood, can change the topography of the earth. So you can't really find stuff that the way it was is not what it is now. So that's why the Garden of Eden would be pretty hard to find, because all the topography was changed. All that mud, all the dirt, all the soil, all the sediment was thrown up and moved around, and new mountains formed, and land masses were revealed when everything's changed. So they have estimate. Even the Tigris River, the original rivers, the four rivers, Euphrates rivers, all that, they probably weren't even there where they're at now. They were in different locations. So that's why archaeology is pretty relevant, because archaeology will reveal, if it's deep enough in the earth, when they dig it up, if it was protected from probably was kicked up from the flood and redeposited somewhere else. So even they find fossils and other archaeological evidence, it probably wasn't there, originally. Probably, if it's old enough, if it's over 7 to 10,000 years old, it was picked up by the floods and redeposited somewhere else. That's why you don't find whole fossils of dinosaurs and these ancient beasts. You find fragments here and there, and they're usually miles apart from each other. So when they find a femur or something, they'll find an ankle bone or a skull, 30, 40, 50 miles away or something, because nothing survived. Those things were ripped apart by a catastrophe, by the flood. Ripped their flesh apart. Strong currents, earthquakes, they were torn apart, and they were crushed, they were smashed, these dinosaurs. That's why you never find a complete skeleton usually. Sometimes they do, they find a complete skeleton, but when they find them, they're in a swimming position. They're always trying to swim, these lizards and dinosaurs. They're always in a swimming position. They're swimming, they're treading water when they dig them up in the earth, which is very interesting, because it gives testimony to the global flood.